seriously popular.
Hi, Kelly. It's been another insane week here at MAGAland. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's been a crazy 11 days into Trump's second term, and this week especially has been really shocking and dramatic.
It's been a busy week in the New York City newsroom. I cannot imagine in DC because you're both dealing with the first days of the Trump administration, and we just had this horrific plane crash near the Reagan National Airport. We send our thoughts and prayers to the victims of what has been the worst air tragedy we have seen in recent years in the country. Everyone on board was killed after a helicopter crashed into an American Airlines passenger jet. How is the vibe in DC with this terrible tragedy?
It's a horrible tragedy, and our thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims affected. It was pretty shocking to see the first reports of the plane crash come in on Wednesday evening. I actually live just a few miles away from Reagan National Airport, so my husband and I could hear the sirens as the first responders were headed toward the crash site. There was a lot of confusion at first at what exactly had happened. A lot of questions still remain. It's really horrible seeing the personal faces come out of the tragedy. There's been victims in the local school districts in Virginia where we live. It's just really horrible to see young children who passed away with their parents, a lot of ice skaters in the National Ice Skating Association. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was actually sworn in just hours before the crash took place, which was pretty astounding. So he was straight to work. He was at the airport site right away, getting down to the bottom of the answers that everyone's still demanding, because we really don't know much about why the crash occurred. It was truly all hands on deck Wednesday night with Trump and his cabinet members. They were in the Situation Room immediately after the crash. We saw Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, confirm that the president was informed of the crash and he was looking into it. So there has been a lot of transparency coming out of the Trump administration and the White House about this, but there has been also some controversy as Trump tried to blame the crash on DEI. So I'd love to get into the president blaming DEI for the crash right after this.
Welcome to MAGAland.
We're back here and welcome to MAGAland to break down everything about this plane crash, including the response by the new Trump administration. As Kelly mentioned right before the break, Trump came out within hours to the White House press briefing with comments that many found scandalous. He said that the FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions. Of course, this was before we knew anyone who was in the helicopter crew. However, we now know that it appears that the helicopter was the one that went into the plane's path. For some reason, the helicopter was out of its approved path and altitude. It was supposed to be flying at a maximum altitude of 200 feet, and it was over 300. I do think Trump came out swinging at a moment where maybe it was time to be a little more measured, given that we didn't know the names of the victims. He also attacked the previous administration. He said that Secretary Pete Buttigieg of the Biden administration, he said something like, that guy, he's a real winner, huh? He's a disaster. And Pete Buttigieg answered right away, saying that Trump's comments were despicable. And he noted that these incidents did not happen while he was at the head of the transportation department. But Kelly, now we know that one of the co-pilots in the chopper was a woman, and we know that the chopper left its path. Do you think that maybe Trump knew some of this and that's why he was so ready to come out with these statements?
Yesterday, Trump really went in on the DEI aspect, saying that his administration is going to hire the best and the brightest. We need to get rid of all the Biden administration DEI policies in place that clearly were impacting the FAA, according to the president. But today, he had a Truth Social post out blaming the Black Hawk pilots for flying too high by a lot. It was far above the 200-foot limit that's really not too complicated to understand, is it? So now it seems like he's shifting his blame from the DEI, which was his initial gut reaction, to the actual helicopter pilots themselves. And as you mentioned, one happens to be a female. So it sort of is intertwined. He's looking for something concrete to blame so that his administration won't be at fault, hence why he also was targeting Pete Buttigieg yesterday. The black box was actually recovered last night out of the plane. So we'll hopefully get more answers in the final moments leading to the crash so that this won't happen again, because it has been very jarring, very scary first initial week for the Trump administration to deal with such a massive loss of life right off the bat.
I'm a news reporter and I've been covering an increasing amount of close calls in airports between aircrafts. I spoke to an expert who said something similar, that there has been issues and that experts of aviation thought that something like this was imminent. Apparently, there is an issue with short staffing of air traffic controllers after the pandemic. The expert told me that we have seen several close calls over the last years. It does seem like this was something that could have and should have been prevented.
I also wanted to bring up to Trump addressing the crash yesterday during a little press conference he did in the Oval Office. A reporter from Fox News asked him if he had plans to visit the crash site, and Trump actually ended up making a crass joke by saying, "What are you anticipating me doing? Go, quote, swimming in the Potomac to see the crash remains," which I thought was a little distasteful. I don't necessarily think Trump needed to go to the site of the crash, but I do think with just the political environment, especially with the families still learning about their loved ones being lost, it was a little bit of an interesting comment.
During the White House press briefing, also as the press were asking him, do you think it's appropriate for you to be casting doubt when we don't even know the names of the victims? And he said something like, what, knowing the names of the victims has anything to do with what caused the crash? So we're seeing a Trump that's just being his full self.
Definitely. He's let the guard down. He had a very polished first week, and now we're seeing him resort back to some of his old ways of off the cuff comments. His train of thought is going from left field to right field at any given moment. That's the Trump that we know.
Before the election, we heard so much about Project 2025 and how this was the secret plan of the far right to fundamentally change the country. Trump distanced himself from that plan. But we have seen birthright citizenship and, of course, DEI. What can you tell us? Is it true that Trump is secretly going to fulfill all these things? Is it misinformation? What's going on with Project 2025?
It's certainly true that Trump's administration is taking the playbook from Project 2025 and running with a lot of their top plans and priorities, including some of the executive orders he signed, the focus on tariffs of foreign nations, deportations, federal freezing of funds, and others. But his White House is still distancing from Project 2025. His spokesperson today, in a statement to CNN, actually said the president has never been involved in 2025 and his agenda is separate from the Project 2025. I think that was a line that extended from the campaign because the Democrats were using it as such an attack point on the campaign trail. However, voters didn't truly care about Project 2025. They didn't see it as this big, dark monster enemy that the Democrats are painting it out to be. It didn't have an influence over the outcome of the election. So I don't think necessarily the White House needs to distance so far away. One of Trump's top nominees for the director of OMB, his name is Russ Vought. He was before the Senate last week for his confirmation hearing, and his vote should be up probably next week. The director of OMB is a very high influential job in the White House. They oversee every single policy the White House puts out. They're in charge of implementing it domestically and internationally. So it's a huge job with a lot of power. Russ Vought was actually one of the authors of Project 2025. So no matter how much the White House wants to distance from the agenda, with Vought coming in, they will be intertwined to some level. So that'll be an interesting to keep an eye on.
Trump is someone that we know picks and chooses what he wants. He's not a traditional Republican. He's not a traditional with any party line. And he'll probably take whatever he wants from Project 25 and leave whatever he doesn't want out. It seems like that's what's going to happen to me.
Trump's announcement this week that he plans to open Guantanamo Bay in Cuba to 30,000 illegal migrants, which was a really shocking proposal. It definitely wrinkled the feathers of Democrats across the nation. There were mayors coming out and Democrats in Congress coming out against this plan. They say it's inhumane. Wanted to get your thoughts on it though. Right now, Trump's in a conundrum where he has a lot of illegal migrants he wants to deport. He's running into some challenges with that with some of the nations that don't want to accept them back. Do you think that it's a solution to put 30,000 migrants in Guantanamo Bay? What do you think that'll look like?
Well, I'm one of the migrants that I was a little concerned to hear of the plan of a migrant camp in Guantanamo, particularly because I'm confused. Is the focus deportations? If we're going to deport these bad people, why are we going to build a detainment center for them? I'm also confused about the administration's claims that they're only going after violent criminals right now to be deported because the migrants who have arrived in Colombia, at least, none of them had criminal records in neither country. Of course, there are people that are saying that just crossing the border illegally is a crime. However, I've heard lawyers say that's actually a civil violation. But it appears that the migrants who are first getting deported are all recent illegal border crossings. So a lot of confusion again about what this administration really plans to do with migrants.
I also wanted to note that we received a dailymail.com exclusive this week from a senior White House official who detailed to us that in the president's first 9 days in office, he arrested over 7,500 illegal migrants. They pointed out several of the arrests that were made, several that were violent criminals, including those charged with child pornography, attempted murder, some of the violent gang members. So there definitely are still a handful of migrants who have those more egregious crimes and are being deported back.
Right. It's also worth noting that whenever these undocumented migrants commit these crimes in the US, if they are convicted, they have to serve their sentence here. So maybe that's another thing that Guantanamo Bay could be for.
Definitely. And we'll get more into this after this break.
I also wanted to talk to you about my interview with Dr. Phil. We've been talking about the Trump administration's ICE raids and the kind of undocumented immigrants they're going after. Dr. Phil McGraw actually went on one of these operations with ICE in Chicago, and I talked to him a little bit about it. He seem to defend the idea that ICE officials are patriots who are not trying to disturb these communities. They're not going after an undocumented mom who has never done anything wrong in this country. They are really focusing on rapists, murderers. He had an interesting moment actually with a Thai undocumented migrant accused of child sex crimes. But I thought it was interesting, and it is telling of images that we are going to see a lot. This Thai immigrant, you could tell, has been in the US his entire life because he spoke English with less of an accent than I have. And he also recognized Dr. Phil immediately. What a moment. This guy's getting arrested and he's like, Dr. Phil? And Dr. Phil's like, you know who I am? And of course he did. It appears this guy has been in the States most of his life. Let's take a listen to what Dr. Phil told me.
Mr. Holman has said we're going after the worst first. I asked him straight up, are you sweeping neighborhoods where you believe there are concentrations of illegal aliens? Are you going to schools and taking students out of schools? And he said, absolutely not. She seemed to me to be very sincere in her empathy, but I'm not sure who she was identifying with. The people that were taken down in this operation in the command center, and we were reading off of the convictions: murder, child sex crimes, aggravated assault.
I thought it was really interesting, his reaction to Selena Gomez, because she in a very caricature-like way that's been mercilessly mocked, represented what a lot of people are feeling. A lot of liberals, really, maybe because of misinformation, maybe because of Trump's own words, feel that the federal government is going to go into schools and churches and round out and look for undocumented immigrants. And that's why Selena was crying, saying, "My people, they're coming after you. I don't know what to do. I'll do anything." I asked Dr. Phil about that, and he said he does not think that Selena Gomez would think that the people that he saw arrested are quote unquote her people, because these are actually, as he described them, worst of the worst immigrants.
I think it's interesting to see an on-the-ground perspective during these raids. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem also was on the ground in New York earlier this week with ICE agents in the wee hours of the morning on a similar raid mission, and they were targeting some of these more violent criminals. And New Yorkers said that they were happy they were off the streets. Their city's a little more safer. So it's just the beginning of this as Trump continues his deportation purge.
Kelly, you saw Trump speaking from up close. I'm jealous that you get to be so close to the action. Tell me everything.
So Trump was in his Doral, Miami hotel this week during the GOP conference down in Florida. So all of the House Republicans gathered to try and come to some agreement on Trump's big MAGA bill and MAGA agenda so they could hit the ground running in the first 100 days to try to pass a comprehensive spending bill. Trump made a VIP appearance the first night with all the lawmakers there. I was in attendance at the speech. He received probably a 5-minute standing ovation when he entered the room. Obviously, these are all Republicans who love him. They were standing, shouting, clapping. Everyone was excited. There was definitely an energy in the room. I was worried that no one would sit down because we know how long Trump loves to talk for. The speech went on for a little bit over than an hour. So everyone eventually sat down, but he sort of ran through his normal MAGA talking points about what he campaigned on, what he already delivered on through his executive orders. Notably, he also had his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, with him, and Kellyanne Conway, who's a close advisor. So they got a special shout out from the president. So it was interesting to see him rile the crowd up for some of his closest advisors, which is fun. Another notable moment in the speech was when he called out the wife of Tom Emmer, who's the GOP whip. He was saying that she's beautiful and lovely, and he loves working with her husband. And he actually had her stand up, and she also got a standing ovation. So it was funny how he points out different personalities in the room that he physically just sees in the crowd. I thought the most newsworthy part of his speech was he was talking about the deportation flights that had just kicked off at the time. He compared them to the movie Con Air with Nicolas Cage, who basically has to escape a plane full of convicts. So he had a lot of laughs during that. He was truly cracking up at his own jokes, which is rare to see. He thought it was hilarious. He was talking about how his deportation flights are like the movie, and he wouldn't be willing to get on a flight with all those criminals.
Let's move on to our Melania decoded section, because the First Lady has released her official portrait, and Lord, did it spark discussions online. I wanted to note, because my prediction was that they would put her on the cover of Vogue this time around, but given Vogue's reaction to the portrait, I don't think it's going to happen, because Vogue really went on Melania over this. They said Trump looked more like a freelance magician than a public servant. They called her tuxedo situationally inappropriate and said her clothing certainly didn't help the boardroom pastiche of the background, that she looked like she was guest starring on an episode of The Apprentice. So it looks like Vogue still doesn't like Melania very much. My take is that Melania's doing a power pose here because, as we have been discussing, she really felt slighted during her first term. And she's saying, "I'm back and I'm here to fight." I found it interesting that a progressive magazine like Vogue would hate on her for wearing a tuxedo. However, the Photoshop was a bit much.
I thought it was a great photo. I think it sends a direct signal that she means business. She's here to get down to work this time around. It reflects well after her outfit from the inauguration, which was also more severe, more serious. I thought it was notable that Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend, Bettina Anderson, actually clapped back at Vogue after their scathing comments. She actually posted on her Instagram story a few days ago, "Peace out, Vogue magazine. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. You have gone off the rails."
That's it for today's episode of Welcome to MAGAland. Kelly and I will keep on with everything that goes on in the Trump administration over the weekend to bring you more updates on Monday. Tune in and email us at welcometomagaland@dailymail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Welcome to MAGAland.